All right, so let's get started with our presentation for the second half of chapter 24, dealing with imperialism. So what we see towards the later half, late 1800s, we see the rise of four kind of newbies, four like rookies when it comes to imperialism. And this would be the United States, Japan, Germany, and Italy. Now, the reason I say these are newbies because they haven't had imperialism already, and they are following the footsteps of the kind of the first generation, which would be people like the French and the British and the Dutch. Now, the Spanish and the Portuguese, one thing to note is that they're going to be declining. So they were the first ones to set up colonies in the Americas, right, like Brazil and Latin America. But by the late 1800s, most of those colonies are already independent, and those territories are free. And Spain and Portugal is going to be very much in decline. On top of that, Spain and Portugal will be the last countries of Europe, some of the last countries of Europe to industrialize fully. So they're not going to reap the benefits from industrialization. Now, United States, of course, was busy, conquering North America first, right, expanding westward during the time of Manifest Destiny, fighting against the Native Americans. Japan didn't industrialize until the late 1800s, until after the arrival of the Americans in the West. Germany had just unified in the 1870s, because remember, before that, there wasn't a German nation state. There were simply German people living in a whole bunch of different territories, but there wasn't a Germany. Same thing with Italy. Italy was broken up into Italian city-states all the way into the late 1800s, and then they turned into the country of Italy. They form and unite. So these countries are going to try to catch up with, the British and the French and the Dutch and others in an attempt to remain competitive. Because again, if you fall back behind, then you're at a disadvantage, and if war was ever to break out, you would, lose. Now, let's talk about Japan. Japan, of course, we know the story of Japan. They industrialized after the arrival of the Americans and Matthew Perry. They don't want to get conquered like their neighbor China was conquered, and they are more than happy to go to war. For example, they defeat Russia in the early 1900s in the Russo-Japanese War, right, showing Japanese strength. We're going to see that from there on out, from the beginnings of the 1900s. Japan is going to continue spreading its territory, continue expanding, and creating their empire throughout parts of East Asia and the Pacific. And eventually, this is going to be one of the causes of the Pacific side of the Second World War. Now, America, again, I just mentioned how the United States at first, was struggling and growing westward expansion, fighting against natives. But all the way at the end of the 19th century, all the way in 1898, the United States is going to fight a war against Spain called the SpanishAmerican War, and is going to gain a whole bunch of territories. Right, specific places like the Philippines that you see over here. Of course, the Philippines are part of Southeast Asia. Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam. Guam is a little island somewhere right there, right in the Pacific. So these territories become American territories, American colonies, even though they give Cuba its independence really quickly. The other ones remain territories for quite a while. Now, even though the United States does not conquer or colonize Latin America, it does have quite a lot of influence over Latin America because of its economy. And we also see that the United States economy is going to play a big role in creating the colony of Hawaii. So, for example, the United States are going to get involved in Colombia when a group of rebels want to separate from Colombia to create the country of Panama. And the United States are going to help these rebels because the United States wants to build the canal, the Panama Canal. We see that the United States is going to practice this American, or what, from Latin American point of view, this Yankee imperialism or neo-colonialism, because the United States is going to have a lot of financial interest in what's going on in Latin America. And many times they're going to step in and send the military to reinforce those interests or protect those economic interests. So, for example, the United Fruit Company, which is what we now call Chiquita, right? The Chiquita Bananas Company. They owned a whole bunch of land in Honduras. And the peasants in Honduras began demanding of their government more land opportunities, more land redistribution. So when the government was thinking about reforming its laws so that peasants can gain more land, the United States sent its military to make sure that that didn't happen, because if it did happen, then this United Fruit Company will lose a lot of its land and a lot of its profits. So again, the United States will intervene, will get involved in foreign affairs to protect its economic interests. We do the same thing in the United States when in Hawaii, when there was a monarchy. Hawaii used to be a kingdom, and the monarchy was trying to kick out foreigners because they saw that they were having a negative influence. And when they started rebelling, the United States steps in to protect the Dole Pineapple Company. Pineapple being a big export out of Hawaii at that time. The United States, of course, claims dominion or protection over Latin America. And this is kind of similar to this whole white man's burden mentality that other Westerners had. The United States felt that they were kind of like the bigger, older brother of Latin America, and therefore they restricted any contact or any Europeans from like influencing Latin America, claiming that the Western Hemisphere was under the protection of the United States. And that's what they're claiming, but in reality, right, those places like Mexico and Colombia and Argentina, the United States just wants to have kind of like more direct influence over those countries. The Germans and the Italians, like I mentioned, they're going to form in the late 1800s, 1600s, 1860s, 1870s. They're going to industrialize really quickly, however, and they're going to be part of that scramble for Africa, right, making their way into Africa to gain territories. Italy will suffer one setback in that they'll try to conquer Ethiopia and lose, which is pretty embarrassing because they had such a military advantage. And Germany is also going to have a sphere of influence in China and have little island colonies in Oceania. All right, so that's it for part number 1, those new imperial powers. Thanks for listening and watching and learning. See you next time.